I've always enjoyed cars and kind of wondered what racing would be like. Forza Motorsport and Horizon 5 with a controller has been a fun way to kind of scratch that itch, but I've always wondered what a sim racing wheel and pedal setup would be like. Combine that with getting into F1 thanks to the exciting 2021 season and Netflix's Drive to Survive, of course, and I decided to finally pull the trigger on a force feedback sim racing wheel and pedals. And after reading a ton of reviews, I was kind of torn between the Logitech G923 and the Thrustmaster T300RS GT, and I couldn't really make up my mind, but I was able to get my hands on both of them, so today we're going to kind of dive in, take a look at both, kind of the features and, what I thought of using both of these, and then ultimately I'm only going to keep one of these, so at the end we'll find out which one I'm keeping. But it's not the one that I originally expected. Thanks for watching 9 to 5 Toys. Be sure to like, subscribe, and enable notifications with the bell icon so you don't miss any upcoming videos. Hey everyone, Jordan here with 9 to 5 Toys. Now there are a ton of different sim racing wheels out there, but these are kind of the two most recommended. It's not quite at the bottom tier entry level. A lot of those I assume feel a little bit too chintzy and don't have enough, feedback to really feel good. But these at the $400 to $400 price point are kind of right in the middle. They give you a good feedback as to what, racing simulation might feel like without spending as much money as you have to for a direct drive setup, which can be, thousands of dollars. So both of these wheels come in sets with pedals. They have a lot of controls on them. They have the paddles back here for shifting, and they have quite a few different features built in. So through this review, we'll take a look at both of those and kind of compare them to each other. And so you can get a good idea of, what they might be able to offer for you. So first off, let's start with a very brief introduction to each wheel, starting with the Logitech G923. With an MSRP of $400, this is an updated take on the extremely popular G920/G29, and the G923 has some upgrades that are very key in my opinion. Mainly, the brake pedal has been upgraded with a progressive feel, and we'll talk quite a bit more about that later. There are two different versions available, both work on PC, but have different buttons for Xbox or PlayStation. Another major difference and upgrade here is the dual motor setup with Logitech's new True Force feedback system, and we'll talk more about that in a little bit as well. And then over on the other side, we have the Thrustmaster T300RS GT. It's a bit more expensive at $450, but it offers some key differences. Mainly, the force feedback system uses a belt drive that is both more powerful than the G923 and quite a bit quieter as well. And typically, from my understanding, more power can lend itself to a more realistic feel, as you don't always have to run it at 100% power. And visually, it looks like a beast compared to the much smaller Logitech G923. And the other key difference here is the ability to change out the steering wheel on this T300 wheelbase. And Thrustmaster has a ton of different wheel options. This is a huge differentiator between Logitech. So if you want to or need to replace or upgrade the wheel down the line, very easy to do on the T300RS GT. Both of these wheels are also very approachable. You don't need, a cockpit setup, although they both can be mounted. For that kind of setup, they also both work on a desk. I'm using them on my adjustable desk back here, and everything seems to work pretty well on there. So they have clamping systems on the bottom of the wheelbases that just makes it very accessible and very multi-purpose. All right, so that's a very oversimplified overview of the two different wheels, but now let's take a quick look at the setup process. First up is mounting. The Logitech G923 is pretty much ready to go right out of the box thanks to the non-removable wheel. Before mounting the wheelbase though, the cables do need to be plugged in as they are routed through these little channels, and then the actual ports are inside this little cavity on the bottom of the wheelbase. So make sure you're plugged in first, and then you can go forward with mounting the wheelbase to your desk. With the cables routed, the G923 has a simple and sleek mounting hardware. There are two large dials that can be locked down or pulled up to loosen and tighten the clamps that are underneath the wheelbase. And while it doesn't feel like I can put as much force on these clamps as I can with the T300 wheelbase, it actually felt much more secure in use. That's probably because the T300 is so much larger. On the Thrustmaster side, since the wheel comes removed from the base, the first step is installing that. With the wheel installed, the base can be mounted because the cables plug into the rear of the unit. This is something that I wish the Logitech had. And there are software packages for both of these wheels that you want to download to make sure everything is up to date. All right, now let's move on to one of the main things with these. These are both force feedback wheels, so let's talk a little bit about the force feedback. And the main selling point of the Thrustmaster and why I think it's often recommended over the Logitech is that it has a little bit more torque for force feedback. In my experience though, both of these wheels offer good, precise feedback when you are playing racing simulation games. One major difference on the Logitech G923 is what they're calling their True Force feedback system. From Logitech's marketing, this is supposed to give more fine detail through the wheel, which is supposed to help assist in determining the car's position on a track and what the wheels are doing. In my experience, it does give a little bit more information through the wheel. It kind of just feels like Logitech strapped a rumble pack to the wheel though. It's kind of like a really intense vibration. And moving over different parts of the track, like the serrated curbs, there is a lot of feedback and a lot of vibration, and it makes it quite loud. And I heard this as a common comment when I was doing my research, but because I usually, would be playing up here in my office and no one is going to be really near enough to hear much of the noise coming from this, I didn't really think it'd be that big of an issue for me. One note on that True Force though is that to use the True Force, it only works on certain titles. Logitech has a list on their website. So for my testing to test this out, actually test both of these wheels, I was playing Assetto Corsa Competizione, which I'll just refer to as ACC from now on. And this is a title that is supported for True Force. And it only works on certain titles because it is using some game engine information to provide that extra feedback about the track through the wheel. So a little bit more detail in there is what Logitech's trying to do for this. And I got the Xbox version of this, so I can also play it on my Series X, which I have inside in my basement. And when I was playing Forza Horizon 5, especially when off-roading, the noise and vibrations from this was very loud. My wife was in the other room watching TV, and she started yelling at me, what's that noise, what's going on? So it can be quite disruptive if you have other people in the vicinity that could hear it. If you're playing at night and really need to be quiet, definitely something to keep in mind with the Logitech G923, and might be a reason to go for something else like the T300RS GT. Thrustmaster is using a belt drive system that is more powerful and much quieter as well. You can still kind of hear it. I'll play some B-roll here. We can kind of hear it where I do some quick moves on the wheel. But really, when you are doing those quick moves, that's kind of the only time you ever hear any noise coming from this thing. So very quiet, it feels very smooth, definitely feels powerful as well. So overall, between the two, the Logitech is louder, but I feel like it offers just a little bit more detail. And not necessarily in the way of power and like really cranking your hand, but if you want to kind of dial in that True Force with compatible titles, you do get just a little more information in the wheel. And it can be overwhelming if you have it set too high, like it can really shake and vibrate a lot, but you can also dial that down so you're getting just the right amount for you, because really what it all comes down to is what the best setting is that works for you and makes you faster in your sim game. All right, now let's talk about the actual steering wheels themselves. For me, between the two, Logitech takes the cake on this one. They're both 11-inch wheels, but Logitech is using a stitched leather on here that both looks, feels, and even smells much more premium compared to the Thrustmaster. Both feature a strip up near the top to help center the wheel, and they have quite a few different controls on the front. The G923 wheel offers a bit more variety with controls thanks to a rotating dial and the plus and minus button. But once again, with the Logitech, you are locked into this wheel. Whereas with the Thrustmaster, a year or two down the line, if you want to switch it up, you can do that without replacing the rest of the system. So definitely a bonus with the Thrustmaster. If you feel like, in the future, you might want to upgrade the wheel, this is probably going to be something you want to look at. The Logitech wheel also offers a little LED rev counter up here, so it will light up with your revs. When I was playing ACC, it would do that, although most of the time I found myself looking at the screen rather than looking at the wheel, but that's just my personal experience using it. Behind both wheels, there are paddles here for shifting, and they really are very similar. I think that the Thrustmaster is just a little bit bigger, so a little bit easier to find maybe, but as far as actual force and pulling and actuation, they feel very similar. They even have a very similar click to them. So I couldn't really tell a winner or really even one that I preferred between the two. I thought that they both did very well. And they do both spin with the wheel. They're not, hard set on the wheelbase. So as you're spinning the wheel, those shifters will move with it. All right, and now let's talk about one of the biggest differentiators between the two sets, in my opinion, and that is the pedals. As we can see, both of these systems come with a 3-pedal setup. So there is clutch, brake, and gas. They don't come with a little like shifter box. Both of these have accessories, optional accessories. We can add a shifter if you want. So you take advantage of that clutch, but both sets do come with these 3 pedals. And both of these systems can be customized a little bit. These pedals can be moved around. There are different mounting points on the Thrustmaster you can see here, and the Logitech can be moved around as well. There are different mounting points kind of on the back. I think the Thrustmaster has a little bit more customizability here as far as placement and movement, but yeah, both of them feature that. One major win for the Logitech is this. I'm going to set this down. They call it their carpet grip system, and it can kind of lock out of the way, but then when you flip this little lever and that thing pops down, it's like a little spiky strip that grips into the carpet really well in my experience. Even though the Logitech brake pedal takes more force to push than the stock Thrustmaster brake pedal, I found that when playing on carpet, with this down and locked into the carpet, this was much more stable and didn't move at all, even under heavy braking, repeated throughout a race. Whereas with the Thrustmaster, I found that I had to brace something behind it to ensure that it wasn't moving around. The kind of rubber stops and grips on the bottom of here just weren't enough to really keep it in place for me. So on the 923, these pedals are like one of the most notable upgrades, I think, over the 920 and the 929, the older models from Logitech. Mainly that brake pedals. It has like a progressive spring system. So as you're pushing on it, there's more resistance, as you get all the way down to the bottom. So it's more of a realistic brake feel. That does mean that it requires more force than the Thrustmaster in the stock form, but for me it feels more realistic. I feel like I have a little bit more control. It makes things like trail braking through corners a little bit easier, in my opinion. I much preferred the feel of the Logitech over the Thrustmaster. Now Thrustmaster is aware of this, and they included a conical brake mod, which can be mounted onto any of the pedals actually, but I think it's intended for the brake pedal. And what that does is it provides a little rubber stop, a little rubber bump at the end. And so it limits the brake pedal movement quite substantially, but it does add just a little bit more of a progressive feel at the end, but it's not quite as much as what the Logitech does. I actually preferred to have the mod removed on here and used without it, just because the brake travel was so short when that was installed on there. For me, a big win there on the Logitech over the Thrustmaster when it comes to the brake pedals. On the software side, the G923 can be controlled from the Logitech G Hub app, just like many of its other gaming peripherals. And unsurprisingly, Logitech has a nifty UI to dial in operating range, sensitivity, and centering spring strength. There are also controls for True Force, which can also be applied from a game, and that's what I had selected for playing ACC. Thrustmaster also has a program to update and adjust the T300RS GT. It isn't as snazzy as the Logitech G Hub, but there's some really nice functionality built in there. Besides changing the max rotation angles, there's a tab where you can test forces with a variety of feedback scenarios to get an idea of how much power it will give to the wheel. Alright, so I feel like I've run down through a lot of the basics, a lot of the main features, and kind of how they feel in use. So the big question, which one am I keeping? After my research, I really was dead set on the T300RS GT. I love the idea of having more power. I love the idea of it being a little bit smoother, a little more quiet, being able to replace the wheel. But in my testing over a month and about, I think probably 20 hours in ACC, I really found myself gravitating towards the Logitech G923. I really do appreciate how quiet and powerful the T300RS GT is, but when it comes to the whole package, whole fit and finish, the feedback with the pedals, I feel like I enjoyed racing on the Logitech more than the Thrustmaster. And that even comes down to some details like the mounting hardware on here. I felt like it was more secure. It's easier to do on the Logitech because I'm playing here at my desk, which is also where I shoot videos and work. I have to mount and unmount this thing quite frequently, so it felt a little bit easier to move that around with the Logitech. And really, I think one of the main features that is selling me is the brake pedal on the Logitech G923. It just feels a lot better, in my opinion, than the Thrustmaster. And for me, I still think that's one of the biggest areas I need to improve with when I am racing, is braking and trail braking and making sure that I'm hitting all the right points. But all that being said, if I was trying to be quiet, if I was playing at night with kids in the room right next to me with, barely any noise isolation in between, I don't know that I'd be able to choose the Logitech G923 because it is so loud. So definitely something to keep in mind. Versus the Thrustmaster, it's much more quiet. So if volume and disturbing others is a concern for you, you might want to check this out instead. So I feel very thankful that I was able to test out both of these wheels and get a good feel for both of them. Let me know what you think about them. Which one would you choose for your scenario? Or, would you go with a $1,000 direct drive system? What would you be choosing for your setup? And as far as what's next, I would love to be able to try a direct drive system at some point. But I only have, I think 20, actually, let me check. Okay, I have 30 hours in ACC, and so I'm still very new to sim racing. I need to ensure that it's something that, I want to spend a lot of time in before dropping a ton of money on like a direct drive system like that. Now, that being said, I might look for a simple budget cockpit, something that I can mount the steering wheel to and mount the pedals on, get a little bit better feel for that with ergonomics. You can play at a desk like this, and that's what I've been doing, which is still fun and enjoyable, but I think it would be more fun to be sitting in a more optimal ergonomic position. I also know that Thrustmaster has been teasing a direct drive system, so hopefully that comes out soon. Hopefully it's still pretty affordable. We'll see. And I'm hoping to try to get my hands on that as well. All right, well, that's going to do it for this comparison between the Logitech G923 and the Thrustmaster T300RS GT. If you enjoyed this, let me know down in the comments if you'd like to see a little bit more about sim racing. This is something I've been enjoying getting into. I'd love to cover it a little bit more, but also want to make sure that's something that you all want to see. So let me know in the comments what you think, and thanks for watching. And if you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing. This is Jordan with 9to5 Toys.